Okay, we've reached the top of the hour. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, where we're going to focus on a policy update from Washington on issues that are important to private forest landowners and private forest landowner management. And I think we had titled this it's a summer recess policy update. Summer recess wasn't very long for Congress this year. The Senate left late and the House came back early. So summer recess has looked a little bit different, but that is what we get used to these days, is everything looking a little bit different. I'm Scott Jones, the CEO of Forest Landowners Association, and today I'm joined by Michelle Kane, who's our Director of Communications, and FLA's policy team, Katie Moss, Melinda Gable, and Brian Johnson with the Vogel Group in Washington, D.C. When we're looking at FLA's policy priorities that we focus on behalf of private forest landowners, and I might ask Katie to flip the slide forward. Yeah, there you go. Our policy priorities are set on those core tenets that will ensure success for private forest landowners. And what is success? Success is that you're economically successful in your property, and therefore you have the financial resources necessary to continue managing that property and also pass it down to the next generation who is equally incentivized to manage that property, because it's a good business opportunity and it just makes good business sense. So we really are the only organization that really looks after the economic success of private forest landowners, because ultimately that's how we'll sustain private forest landowners and private forest lands going into the future. When you look at our policy priorities, and really what's top of the list right now is really what's top of the list right here is taxes. And taxes are important because when you're making long-term investments like we do as private forest landowners, decades-long investments, you expect amount of certainty, or you have to have an amount of certainty in order to be successful. We achieve certainty in the way that we manage our lands and plan our lands, and making sure that we site prep correctly, that we deploy the best genetics or trees out on our property, because that gives us a level of certainty, right, in what we're going to have at the end of the rotation. Also, when you're putting those trees in the ground, you're making this investment as a family landowner, as an individual, or as an investment group. You also expect to be treated a certain way from a tax standpoint and from your federal government. And so taxes become a very important part of the overall economic success dynamic when growing and managing forest lands. That's why we're really focused on it now. And there's been a lot of talk going on about in Congress about spending a lot of money. And of course, when you spend a lot of money, you have to make more money. And how do we make money in the government? We tax the citizens. And so there's a lot of concern about how this taxation will work. And thankfully, we have Brian Johnson with us, who stays up late in the wee hours watching what Congress is doing and not doing. That's going to help shed a little light on what's going on and what we should be watching and concerned with. But one area that we've been paying attention to for quite a while is trying to solve some inequities in the tax code that impact the economic success of private forest landowners. And really, from coast to coast, with the amount of natural disasters we've been seeing, the inequity in the tax code as it deals with casualty loss on private timberlands really gets a strong focus on it. When we have forest fires burning in the west, when we have tornadoes, floods, hurricanes coming through the south, and we have invasive species and pests in the northeast, it really brings into focus that there's not a lot of recourse for private forest landowners when they experience a casualty loss situation. And this is something that we've been working diligently to fix. And I want to call Melinda Gable, Forest Landowners Vice President, to update us on where we are with disaster reforestation now. Melinda?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And before I get into the Disaster Reforestation Act, let me provide some background on, how timber growers are, how they fare out when it comes to federal funding after a natural disaster. So when you look at federal funding after natural disasters and how ag producers are treated, of what forest landowners who are managing their trees and their forest for timber are considered an ag producer, no federal funding exists to provide assistance to timber growers when they lose timber from a natural disaster. So there is a program you may be familiar with, which is called the Emergency Forest Restoration Program. And FLA has been working on that program for 5 years now, trying to smooth out some of the wrinkles in it. But what the EFRP does is it provides cost share reimbursements to forest landowners for the reforestation, for the costs that they incur following a natural disaster. But it's not compensation for the loss of their timber crop. So that's where EFRP stands. And often with EFRP, it takes 3 to 5 years before that landowner gets the out-of-pocket costs that they're expected and have to pay to recover their land and put it back into working forest use. So just that's EFRP. And then when you look at ag crops, such as oranges, corn, cattle, timber growers are not allowed to participate in the USDA crop insurance program. So when you look at following a natural disaster and how crop producers are treated and how timber growers are treated, or what programs that came about in Alabama and Georgia, but those were one-offs. Those are not permanent and they cannot be expected. So, you know, what help do timber growers have after they spend 20 to 40 years providing economic benefits, rural jobs, environmental benefits, waiting for their crop to mature. And then within, 20 minutes to a day, it can be wiped out, whether it's a hurricane, a forest fire. Very little. And when you look at the tax code, as Scott mentioned earlier, when you get into what we're talking about with the Disaster Reforestation Act and what we're trying to fix, within the tax code, timber growers cannot even deduct the lost value of their timber from income taxes. There's a section of the tax code, it's the casualty loss of timber section. And the way it is written and what it states is that a landowner can take either the adjusted cost basis or the fair market value for their loss of timber. Now that sounds good until you get to the next section, which says whichever is the lesser of the two. Well, after 84 months, most landowners have written off their adjusted cost basis to where it gets to zero. So if a landowner is in year 15, 20, 30, and a natural disaster comes and takes and destroys their timber, they are not allowed to even take the value of that timber as a deduction from their taxes. And as I already stated earlier, there's also very little assistance funding. Or FLA has been championing this issue with many partners throughout the states and countries to try and fix the tax code so it will allow forest landowners who are growing and managing their forest specifically for timber to be able to deduct the fair market value of whatever timber crop they lose from a natural disaster. So we introduced it this Congress back in June. We worked with Terry Sewell out of Alabama. She's been a great champion for us on this issue. She's a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Because this is a change in the tax code, it's really important to have Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee members supporting this. We also have been working with Congressman Buddy Carter from Georgia, who is the Republican lead on this bill. Great champions for forest landowners districts. So with that, we met with, we've had over 50 meetings, the FLA policy team, making sure that Ways and Means members, staff really understood the nuances in the tax code, understood what it meant when you grow timber, and also with the talk of all the environmental benefits and climate change and looking to forest landowners to be the solution. Now is the time to fix the tax code and to right this wrong. So currently what we have 19 co-sponsors in the House. It is a very bipartisan bill. I think it's like maybe 10-9 Republicans to Democrats. We have co-sponsors in the Pacific Northwest, in the Northeast, and then in the South. So we've done a good job. The members of Congress and their staff understand the issue. That said, it's still a tax bill. Tax bills, generally, ones like this especially, they don't pass on their own. So really the strategy is to try and insert this bill into a larger package that it can become part of. And so that brings us to where we are today with the current state of play, which is literally playing out as we talk, the politics that are taking place in the U.S. House of Representatives. Brian's going to get into that in a little bit when he talks at a larger level. But the current strategy is we're in a good position to have the Disaster Reforestation Act, the text of the bill, inserted into the Senate reconciliation package. But to do that, we have to really make sure that the members of the Senate Finance Committee support this, are willing to advocate that to be inserted. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of groups talking to the Senate Finance Committee members right now, all advocating issues. What we have from Oregon is experiencing and has for the past several, detrimental losses to their territory. We worked with him that he has publicly acknowledged this issue. He did so back in June, a Senate Finance Committee hearing. Cassidy from Louisiana, a Republican champ, issued during a Senate Finance Committee hearing, and Wyden publicly stated he looked forward to working with Senator Cassidy to fix this issue. So what that brings us to right now is the need for constituent support. So members of Congress, for them to really champion an issue, we can bring the issue forward. We can tell them about how it's impacting landowners across the country. But what we really need is to focus on the Senate Finance Committee members who are Democrats, because that's who's making decisions on the reconciliation package. So you have Senator Wyden, you have Senator Cantwell, Feinstein, Stabenow. Those are the Democrat members that really are from forestry states. Now, we also have a few others. I know there's folks on here from Pennsylvania, Virginia, New Hampshire. Your senators, Casey, Warner, Hassan, they also serve on the Senate Finance Committee. So you can easily lend support through your voice as a constituent to let them know that the Disaster Reforestation Act should be included in the reconciliation package. Other two senators that we're working with are Georgia freshman senators Ossoff and Warnock. We have also met with them. Where everybody is right now, key. They need to hear from their forestry holders and that it needs to be inserted into the reconciliation package. So you can easily go to FLA's website, and the top right corner is a take action. It will take you to our take action page, give you all the details. We also have pre-written emails. It will automatically send it to your member of Congress, send it to your senator. And that's where we are right now. As I said, we are in good position to try and get this through. We have grassroots efforts underway in most of these states. And I would encourage you to take part, share the email, and go to our website. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian to give you the state of play as it stands right now with taxes. And then we can have questions later after Brian's finished with his talk.
Thanks, Melinda. And I saw a couple of folks indicated they were having some audio issues. If anyone has any questions from the last presentation, we're happy to answer those as well. And of course, please continue to chat and use the Q&A function for your questions. So where do things stand in Congress? It's always a fun question to answer. I'll try and do my best. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm a principal at the Vogel Group. Have been working with FLA for a number of years on these issues. Currently, as we speak right now, the House is actually considering a vote on the budget resolution, and I'll talk a little bit about this process and how we got here. If you'll recall, earlier in the year, President Biden put forward what many are calling a very aggressive tax increase program, along with spending measures on various green and renewable energy and climate change related measures that have found their way in some form or fashion into the infrastructure debate. A couple weeks ago, you saw a group of bipartisan senators known as the G10, that stands for the Gang of 10, go to the White House, meet with President Biden, and they announced a deal on infrastructure. The president and Speaker Pelosi then indicated shortly thereafter that any such move on infrastructure would need to be coupled with a reconciliation package. I'll discuss a little bit about what that means in a minute, but essentially that is the larger $3.5 trillion package that, if the president has his way, would have a lot of the problematic tax issues that we're all monitoring. That happened several weeks ago, and the Senate recently passed the G10 infrastructure package. And then the Senate started debate on what was called a budget resolution. The budget resolution is what sets up the reconciliation process. And I'll stick on the Senate for a while, and then I'll move to the House and where things are literally as we speak. That's why I keep looking over to check C-SPAN to make sure we're not missing anything. The Senate moved to vote on the budget resolution, which, as you can see here, passed on a party line vote. And this sets up the reconciliation process, which we expect would include capital gains increase, stepped up basis repeal, a rise in the corporate tax rate, and a rise in the individual tax rate to 39.6%. However, during the budget resolution process in the Senate, there's something called a vote-a-rama. And this is where members of the Senate introduce amendments. Many of them are messaging amendments, non-binding amendments, and they have votes. They voted on 40 or 50 some amendments this past round. And these amendments can tell us what we might expect moving forward. Now, keep in mind, there is no text drafted of reconciliation or what these tax hikes may look like. So we're only basing some of this off of the president's budget and outlines he put forward. And so in that, Senator Thune, a Republican, introduced an amendment that basically said, we are not going to tax folks twice when they die. We're not going to repeal step-up basis. We're not going to raise capital gains. We're going to keep our family farms, our family businesses, and their taxes low. That passed 99-0. And the only reason it's 0 is Senator Roger Wicker was absent at the time of the vote. Immediately following that vote, Senator Cortez Masto, Democrat from Nevada, introduced an amendment that said, well, we're only going to target the top 1% on step-up basis repeal, cap gains hikes, and things like that. That was defeated Kristen Sinema, the moderate Democrat from Arizona, voted no on that amendment to cast the one defeating vote. So that was defeated on a fairly party line vote with Kristen Sinema joining the Republicans to vote against that. What does that mean? So the budget resolution passed the Senate with those two amendments contained therein. And now at noon today, the House is going to set up a series of votes on the budget resolution, on voting rights bills, and ultimately on the G10 infrastructure package. If the budget resolution vote passes, here we go right here. So if the budget resolution vote passes, then the Senate reconciliation process moves forward. So right now, Speaker Pelosi was meeting all night. They had dinner brought in, they were there until the wee hours of the morning with moderate Democratic members of the House. 9 of them sent a letter to Pelosi saying, you need to pass infrastructure, not move forward on a budget resolution and reconciliation. Let's just pass infrastructure. Speaker Pelosi can only afford to lose 3 votes. If she loses 4 votes, the budget resolution fails. So let's assume for the sake of this scenario that Speaker Pelosi is able to herd all of her Democratic colleagues together. They pass the budget resolution. This then will set up the process of Senate reconciliation. Reconciliation is a Senate procedural vote whereby they only need a simple majority to pass legislation, not the 60 vote threshold. This means that every Democrat has to support the reconciliation package, and then Kamala Harris, as the 101st senator, will come down and be the tie-breaking vote for 51-50 to pass reconciliation forward. Right now, if the House passes the budget resolution, the Senate committees will work on their reconciliation packages. We expect Senate Finance to work on a package that pays for the $3.5 trillion. If the president has his way, this package would include an increase in the corporate rate to 28%, an increase in the individual rate to 39.6, higher taxes on capital gains, perhaps 40%, and a repeal of step-up basis. But let's look at what we just discussed. The amendment that Senator Thune had that said we don't want to do step-up basis repeal, we don't want to raise capital gains, that passed 99-0. And Kristen Sinema voted against the Cortez Masto amendment. And Kristen Sinema has already said she will not be the deciding vote for a $3.5 trillion massive spending package. So if they go forward with that package as the president wants, it's going to get pushback from Sinema, probably from Manchin, because Manchin said the corporate rate should only be up to 25%, not the 28% the president wants. So they might float some trial balloons before going back to the drawing board with a little bit of a pared down package. And as Melinda discussed earlier, this reconciliation package is where we're hopeful to get the casualty loss tax fix in. And that's why it's so important that you all contact your Senate Democratic members, especially those who are on finance, as Melinda discussed earlier. If the budget resolution is not passed, the three votes today, budget resolution, voting rights, and then infrastructure. If budget resolution fails, I have no idea what's going to happen with voting rights issues. And then you'll move on to the G10 infrastructure package. And I would assume that that will pass with flying colors. And then we will move on. The reconciliation effort is over if the budget resolution fails. So those are your two paths forward that we will have some type of a conclusive decision in the next few hours here. Things to watch, what this impacts. The debt ceiling. Republicans have said they're not going to raise the debt ceiling, that Democrats control Congress, and especially if they're convinced on ramming through a partisan-only reconciliation package, they're not going to expect any help, or they're not going to get any help, rather, from congressional Republicans. Same with government funding and shutdown. What happens at September 30th? What happens to the COVID benefits for individuals that are set to expire on September 30th, as well as government funding? Do they kick the can down the road on government funding until the end of the year, which sets up a very big fight around December that will have other bills in it that we're watching, such as National Defense Authorization Act, which has passed 61 years in a row in a bipartisan manner. Obviously, Afghanistan complicates things, and what Congress may need to do to appropriate additional economic relief for Afghan refugees entering the U.S., entering the workforce. And so, as you can tell, things are clear as mud here in Washington, but those are the two paths forward, and we are very optimistic that we will be successful in trying to get our provisions included in reconciliation. But again, this is where your help really comes into play, as Melinda said. And so I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. And so with that, I will yield my time back and look forward to answering your questions later.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Melinda. There's a lot going on, and some of the toughest questions we have to answer for landowners at the association are tax questions, because so often, like, as you know, everyone's tax situation is a little bit differently, but there is a little different for everyone. But there are provisions within the tax code that we know can create parity with other ag user groups, like Melinda was mentioning, with casualty loss. And of course, we all get affected when the goalposts get moved midstream with raises in capital gains, or losing step up in basis, or we lose tools that are essential to our operations, like kind exchanges. So those are all very important to us. We do our best to try to keep information that's helpful to you on our website, and also do webinars just like this one. Katie, I do see that we have a few questions from Patricia about some of the taxes. And yeah, I know one of these questions you're asking is about forest fires that are intentionally set. And Melinda, you could probably help out here. I mean, the casualty loss change that we're talking about is for casualty loss, all casualty loss situations, not just federally declared natural disasters. Is that right, or does it have to be federally declared?
No, if you are managing and owning your forest for timber, it is any disaster, and a natural disaster is defined as any sudden and unexpected event. So in the case of a cigarette going out, but then you have this fire that becomes uncontrollable, that is a natural disaster that has occurred.
We also have another question from Patricia in the chat box. Is there a way in Texas to have depreciation for timberland owners? I'm assuming like ag.
Yeah, Melinda, we can answer that. I think, obviously timber is an appreciating asset, unlike, oil or natural gas, so to speak. And, one of the things that we're struggling with is one of the things we're doing is educating Hill offices on how this land is treated and how these timber costs are treated. And Melinda does a fantastic job of explaining the cost basis comparison and what happens when you start to account for these costs. And so, Melinda, if you want to take that from here.
Yeah, I mean, we're just, as far as the way the taxes and depreciation with the casualty loss specifically. So if you were to have a stand of trees, let's say at 15 years and you lost it, you would go based on fair market value of what those trees would be worth, whether it's from a thinning or a year 20, and it's what the stumpage rate is. Does that cover does that address the question? No.
And I'll tell you this, if not, please jot down the emails that you see on your screen right here, and feel free to contact us directly, and we can get a clear answer. I mean, one of the other questions was finding an accountant who's well versed in timber tax issues in your area. I'm going to be honest with you, that's the value of networking with other private forest landowners. Is there's not a readily available guide to those types of folks. I know we have several of them I saw on this phone call today. And if you're in, say, Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas, even some out west, I mean, we can guide you in those directions of people that we know that participate with the association who are well versed in timber taxes. But that's really the value of networking with one another as private forest landowners, is you get to learn from one another who is operating in your area. So I just encourage you, if you're not participating in an organization at a local or state level, please do so. We encourage you, of course, to always be involved at the federal level. Everywhere you get taxed, you ought to be really involved in an association that's representing you, because I know we saw some questions or chat at the beginning about property taxes. I mean, that's where your local organizations and your state organizations are really going to come in and help you out. So really important that you try to network as a private forest landowner in all those areas. Katie, any other questions that we can address?
Yes, so one more that I see here, how would changing the taxes affect all the way down to the state level? In South Dakota, it's hard to talk with assessors about timber. Could this tax reform potentially help with some of those state tax discussions? And this would be the Disaster Reforestation Act is what they mean by tax reforms.
Good question. So the Disaster Reforestation Act and the casualty loss only applies to the federal taxes you would be paying. State taxes are treated differently based on each state's tax code.
One thing I just kind of expand that made me think about there is when there is a recognition, and this is kind of the vision that we have as an organization, is that private landowners are recognized for all their environmental and economic contributions they make to our society as a whole. And, making sure that private forest landowners have the ability to reforest after casualty loss, and that the tax code is supporting that and not just leaving private forest landowners to their own accord to go out and reforest, is a significant recognition of the importance of private forest landowners and the work that we do to our economy and our environment as a whole. And so I would think that this would be a signal sender out to other parts, other states, other parts of the country to say, if you want to have, if this is something you value, if private forests are what you value and forest land in general is what you value and private forest landowners are the ones managing it, then you need to structure your tax code to incentivize them to continue that management and not punish them or offer them assistance when necessary. We have reached the half hour, Katie. Are there any other questions that we need to answer? We can certainly answer some more, but is there one here? It looks like for Brian from Hayes. Katie, you want to take that?
Yeah. So Brian, regarding the Senate vote-a-rama where the outcome was 99-0 rejection of canceling the stepped up basis and not increasing other taxes. This vote includes Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren as voting against. Do you think either is really against this, or is there some other reason that they would vote no?
Yeah, as I said earlier, some of these votes are symbolic and messaging votes. I think if it was a straight up or down vote on any of these measures individually, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren certainly would vote to increase your taxes, regardless of what they say otherwise. Again, symbolic messaging vote, 99-0. What you want to focus on here, though, is the defeat of the Cortez Masto part, where even the top 1% being hit by these taxes. You don't have a unified Democrat support for something like that. So it's going to be very hard to get this done. And let me just also add that, should measures move forward, again, on a smaller reconciliation tax increase package, we do not believe that those would increase or that those would include step up basis repeal. And we do not believe that those would include an increase in capital gains. However, we do believe that a compromise on a lower package would likely increase the corporate tax rate to 25%. And unfortunately, for those in the higher federal income bracket, you are likely to see an increase to 39.6% as well. All of this would occur in a straight party line vote, assuming they can get Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin to agree with that.
Okay, we're a few minutes after. I want to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. I'll encourage you to please watch out for additional webinars. I believe we have about 3 or 4 more in the works between now and the end of the year. If you're not receiving information from us, you can see it on your screen here. This is how you can get in touch with us. We do not send out newsletters. We send out information you need to stay informed about how you can engage in making sure that you have certainty when it comes to some of these political issues that affect your private forest ownership. I want to thank Brian Johnson with the Vogel Group and the FLA policy team for all your work and time today. And I hope all of you good health and safety out there. And please reach out to us if we could ever be of assistance to you. Hope everybody has a good afternoon. Thank you.